Welcome back to my channel. We'll be sharing with you guys two reports. Number one is civil war in the state of Zionist Israel, also named as Israel. And then the second one, we'll be talking about severe escalation, quote unquote, severe escalation. And this is coming directly from none other than the Zionist Zelensky himself. So let's talk about both of this, but let's focus on the first part, which is this civil war happening as we speak in Zionist state. So extremist Israeli Jew, listen to this. Extremist Israeli Jew attacked IDF commander in occupied West Bank. Settlers brand him a traitor. Now, before I actually share with you this particular news, I want to give you some background idea so that you know where this is heading, this civil war. So you have seen this video on social media. These are Zionists. They were rioting, they were protesting to give them the right to rape the prisoners of the Palestinians. When they were not given this right, they started rioting and they started to shout, they started to fight. They had this huge chaotic situation ensued just because of that one demand. They said, we have the right and the government is not doing it. When the government is, that time when they actually imprisoned 2 or 3 soldiers, Israeli soldiers, for abusing prisoners. I don't know what kind of abuse that was for the Zionist state, because they never hold anybody accountable. As long as you kill and abuse and rape Palestinians, there is no accountability. But nevertheless, for maybe publicity stunt, they decided to sentence 3 soldiers to jail. And when they were there, people, these Zionist monsters, they came out demanding their release, because according to them, these soldiers and they themselves have the right to rape women, children, and abuse them in their prisons and kill them at the same time. It shows, guys, that these people, these monsters, they're turning on each other against their government and the government officials every single time. And the situation is just getting out of control, especially now that they are seeing that the government is not ending this war. Rather, they're making it worse, and in the process getting a lot of their fellow Zionists getting killed. They don't like it, so they're coming out in protest in huge numbers. Another example of this one is this: 1,000 musicians. Take a look at this one. 1,000 musicians, they came out to protest against the government. Why? Because they want the hostages to be back. Now, 1,000 musicians, organizing this kind of event is not to be taken lightly. Can you imagine what is happening with the rest of the population in the Zionist state? They're fuming against the government, and also at the same time, the government is cracking down on them, telling them, go back home, you do not know what you're talking about. In fact, the government is pushing and forcing some of its civilians, some of its citizens, to join the army. And therefore, we are getting this kind of report now where they are chasing their own IDF commanders away from West Bank. The IDF condemned the attack as lawless behavior. Coming from who? Not from Palestinian, but from the fellow Zionist. Hebron, a historic flashpoint, sees heightened tensions during this event, with increased restrictions on Palestinians and clashes involving settlers, underscoring the challenges of military operation, how difficult it is in the divided areas. Therefore, guys, we are here to tell you this news. And as Scott Reeder, military general analyst, and also Colonel Douglas McGregor, they predicted that this is where it is heading. Israel is going to be ending up in a civil war, in addition to what we are already seeing at the airport, where hundreds and thousands of the Zionists, they're leaving the country, they're fleeing the promised land. Whoever is staying behind, they are not happy. They are disgruntled, they're mad, they're crazy, they're lunatics, and they're turning on against each other, especially against the government forces. So this is where you are heading the state of Zionists, you are going to kill yourself, you're going to destroy yourself. And of course, on top of all of this, to make things even worse, they now hear that their own prime minister is under arrest warrant. Every time he travels, anywhere he travels in the world, he will have to double check, triple check that he will not get arrested in that country. Especially in Europe. Most of the European countries, they said, we are going to be acting on it, including Canada. So this criminal is now terrified. So when they see their own government, their own head of the state is being convicted as a criminal, and right now he's a fugitive, he's a big time monster, they lose hope. They don't see any future in the state of Israel. And so they are rioting, they are frustrating, they're venturing out, their frustration and all that. Now, I also want to actually share with you this particular news that we are seeing on the mainstream media and everywhere else so often these days. Why? Because of the stupid people running the show. They are making more and more mistakes. I want to actually play this video from CNN, I believe. Nick Payton Walsh, the reporter, he made some very good point. Take a listen.
Parliament is closed today after a long, intense...
Okay, so the Ukrainian parliament is closed. Ukrainian people, the government, they are now so terrified, they are not doing anything. There's no activities going on. The embassies are closed. The parliament is closed. Why? Because they fear anytime a ICBM might hit them. And can you imagine if that ICBM has nuclear warheads? Oh my God.
This week in Russia's war against the country. Lawmakers are pointing to the risk of a Russian missile attack on a part of Kyiv where government buildings are located. And there's still plenty of reaction coming in after the Russian president said Moscow launched a new ballistic missile on Ukraine's Dnipro region on Thursday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calls that move, quote, a clear, severe escalation of the war. China is calling for restraint, and British intelligence is warning about instability on Ukraine's front lines. Let's get right to CNN's Nick Payton Walsh, who is on the ground for us there in Kyiv. Nick, so we now know a bit more about the type of missile Russia launched yesterday. What message was Vladimir Putin trying to send?
Okay, I have not seen a CNN reporter to be so blunt about the true message sending to Joe Biden administration, because here, Nick, because he's looks like he's in Ukraine. Yes, he's in Kiev. He sees with his own eyes those footages, and he hears firsthand from these people, witnesses, what kind of ICBM or intermediate missile range is being used by Russia, and he knows that this is not a time to play with Russian military. He knows. This is why he has a very clear message to the world that even though things were working, things were going to the right direction for a peaceful settlement of the issue, but then all of a sudden you see Joe Biden, he lost his election, his Democratic Party lost his election, and everything just flipped upside down.
That Russia still has technology on the battlefield that it can deploy, and technology, the key part of Vladimir Putin's message, technology that's hypersonic, non-nuclear, and he says can evade all known Western air defense systems. That was essentially the reason why it seems this, according to US official, experimental medium-range missile was used over Dnipro in the early hours of yesterday morning. The skyline lit up by something new. It seemed multiple projectiles emerging from the same missile. That's what's called a MIRV, a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle. What you'd normally expect to be used on a nuclear missile. This wasn't the case this time. Conventional weapons. Russia trying to show that it had the means to totally thwart Ukraine's air defenses and therefore the West's as well. Details emerging slowly about this. Vladimir Putin claiming it was a Mark 10 hypersonic non-nuclear missile called the Oreshnik. Ukraine echoing some of those specifics and suggesting it's in fact something called a Kedr. We've heard from the United States that they believe it was, as I say, experimental medium-range ballistic missile, but clearly something new here. And that's what Vladimir Putin's trying to say, is that there's more Russia can do in response to the stark decision by the Biden administration on Sunday to allow Ukraine to use its supplied ATACMS missiles to hit inside of Russia. A dramatic change in US policy in the war, one that Ukraine swiftly took use of, also using UK-supplied Storm Shadow missiles to hit targets inside of Russia as well. That's a remarkable change in the stance of both Moscow and Washington. And just bear in mind, Moscow felt it had to give the US a 30-minute heads up of the use of this missile because they feared potentially it may look on US radars to be something more directed towards Western Europe. Ultimately, I think that is the subtext here, that Russia has new missiles that could fire in that direction and could potentially carry nuclear warheads. That's not...
Wow, this is very, very significant, but because think about this. Russia informed US 30 minutes before the launch of those missiles, those ballistic missiles into Ukraine, because Russia was convinced that US, they would react irrationally and they will be panicking if they see on their radar a missile was launched from Russia, and assuming that it was going to Europe. So this is the level of tension they have. This is the level of distrust they have, if you like, between Russia and the United States, that Russia had to assure US that, look, this is not what we are intending to do to destroy European countries, but this is a missile going to Ukraine, not to European countries. Now, Russia, there is this report that says Russia to rain hypersonic hellfire on Ukraine. Putin's huge new order, mass-produce Oreshnik. So Oreshnik is the weapon, the missile. President Vladimir Putin announced the mass production of missile. Why? Why would you produce this in numbers? It is because he is preparing for war, for escalation. So he gave this order for the mass production of Oreshnik hypersonic missiles following their first combat use in Ukraine. The missile struck a Ukrainian defense facility in retaliation for Western supplied weapons used against Russian territory. So Oreshnik is a big deal right now because this is the first time they're going to be using this kind of missile in addition to those ballistic missiles they have said they will use, those ICBM, even though they have a longer range. These are intercontinental ballistic missiles. Nevertheless, those ICBMs are very, very effective, and a nuclear warhead can easily be mounted on them. Russia is making it absolutely explicitly clear to the Western countries, we mean business, and that you do not ever think we are bluffing. So this is what is happening. Putin praised the Oreshnik's precision and advanced technology, warning the West against escalating the conflict. As Russia enhances its strategic arsenal, officials accused NATO of provoking a global missile crisis, heightening concerns over military escalation. So again, the escalation has already taken place, and Volodymyr Zelensky, he knows about this, and he knows that his end is very, very soon. Let's take a listen at this report one more time, because he'll be mentioning about German Chancellor cozying up to Putin, telling him, hey, buddy, we don't want war. Take a listen.
What happened here, or has even appeared, frankly, in the language, but it is essentially in the background. And we are into a remarkable moment in this conflict, Fred. You mentioned earlier the British intelligence assessment. That's the Ministry of Defence in London. Normally quite rosy in what they say about Ukraine's war effort, but saying yesterday that the front line was unstable, unlike any time it had been since the invasion. That's a euphemism for the fact that nearly every point on the compass, we're here hearing bad news from soldiers on the front line. This weather is extraordinary, but even prior to it, finding Russia has an enormous tolerance for casualties and is pushing forwards. And just cast your mind back to 7 days ago, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz telephoning Vladimir Putin, breaking nearly 2 years of isolation from Western leaders through that move of diplomacy, essentially to try and curry favour with Scholz's own East German electorate, who are slightly pro-Russian because of forthcoming elections. That sort of started really a diplomacy which may pick up ahead of the Trump administration, but instead we've seen remarkable days of escalation between two nuclear powers, the United States and Russia, where Ukraine has been their unfortunate proxy battleground for 1,003 days now. But in the last week, it felt like those two capitals were ever closer, not to direct conflict, I think that's still far off, but to more intimate involvement against each other in this war. Fred?
So two things I want to make mention of finally. Number one is that the Ukrainian front line is quote-unquote destabled, means it is destroyed. He said this is a euphemism, actually, what is happening in reality, which is a complete destruction of the Ukrainian front line. They're losing military, and the military is becoming demoralized. They have no reason to fight, to carry on this fight, especially in this kind of weather. This is number one point. Number two is that, are you telling me that Biden sabotaged the peace process? He had other plan for Germany than to make a peace deal with Russia? Yes, this is what he sounds like. This is what he's telling, that Olaf Scholz, he called Putin saying that, look, we don't want to fight, let's start diplomacy 2 months ago. And now that they have lost this election, Joe Biden is like, no, I don't care about Germany. I don't care about any country. I just care about my party, Democratic Party. I want to upend everything Donald Trump had done in the past and what he will be doing in the future. I don't want him to make any peace agreement or stop this war. And therefore, he became absolutely lunatic, as he is the senile man. And he found a very good partner on the other side of the pond, which is Keir Starmer. And the Keir Starmer, this other lunatic, he's like, yeah, Biden, you're right. Yeah, Joe, yeah, let's do it. And not go on any negotiation with Russia. Let's fire Shadow Storm. Let's fire attack camps in them and teach them a lesson. And so, guys, we were very close to have a peace deal in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, even without Donald Trump. But now we do not have that anymore. This is pathetic. This is absolutely unacceptable from the Zionist forces sitting in Washington and elsewhere.